One, here we go.
Yay!
Yay!
Hi!
Nice! Excellent. Excellent.
Subscribe! That's what you wanted? Mark?
Subscribe, everybody. I don't even know what episode number this is. So
Doesn't
here we
matter.
are.
Subscribe to the channel, press the bell, and you're going to be aware of whatever episode this is. Choose a number.
I
the
will
number.
share and do loads of that sort of thing.
Great, excellent.
Okay.
We have Simon Mellish with us today.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi.
Hello, everybody.
I've known Simon for almost 20 years.
Oh, it's 80, it's got to be 20 years, yeah. 18, 19, 20 years since the ACM, 2001, 2002.
I know. I look too young, but
You do, Kira, you do.
it is true.
I am nearly 50 now, believe it or not.
Don't believe it.
I'm still the oldest.
Really? Blimey. Well, your paper round wasn't as long as mine, obviously. Because I'm completely white. Mine was all uphill.
Oh, well, it's really good to have you on, and
It's an
I'd
honour,
like
thank you.
you to tell us about how you got started in drumming, because I don't really know, and I don't know how old you were, and I'd love to know a bit more about that.
Okay, so I'll give a medium version of the story. I started playing. I had my first drum lesson on a week after my 7th birthday, and my father was a professional boxer. So he was a prize fighter, and he travelled around the country with, at the time, with a circus. He was, and you'll see where this fits in a second. So he was the world welterweight champion in 1952. So he was quite a high up fighter. But he came from Manchester, and the guy that he used to train with in Manchester at the time was also the principal percussionist of the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra. And completely separate to each other, they moved to the south coast of England. So my interest in drums came from quite an early age. When back when when I was 4 or 5 years old, you used to come home at lunchtime from school, and there used to be a program called Pebble Mill at 1. And on Pebble Mill at 1, they had a band on every lunchtime, and I was absolutely fixated with the drummer. Now, the funny part of this story is that after Pebble Mill at 1 used to be Rainbow. And Zippy looks like a pair of high hats when he's going like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is exactly how I came to be completely fascinated by the drums. At the age of 5, 6 years old, I would see the drummers and the musicians on there, and then I'd watch Zippy, and somehow this kind of strange association. But quite interestingly enough, when I studied with Bob Armstrong was one of the drummers on Pebble Mill at 1 around about that era. So I remember having that conversation with him, and him sort of mercilessly taking the mickey out of me for it. But that's how I got started. So I had my first drum lesson a week after my 7th birthday with a guy called Les Smith. And I'm quite a short person. I'm just about an inch taller than Colin Walway. So Les,
Which drummers are measured.
exactly, yeah.
So Colin Walway is the standard measurement, and then you're going to be taller or shorter. All right.
Well, the thing with this, it's a bit like being in the police. You used to have to be 5'8". Now you've only got to be Colin's height or bigger. You see. So Les sat down, and I had a New Era practice pad, which looked like a massive doorstop with a piece of hardened rubber on it. I had a pair of Tama 3AN nylon tip drumsticks, and I had a tune a day for the snare drum, and that was what I learnt on with. And I studied with Les for 2.5 years, 3 years, and then he retired. And I had a lesson every week in his flat, and I would do rudiments, and I'd learn to read notation, and a bit of xylophone as well. And it was quite a very traditional sort of way of learning totally different to the way I would do things now with a student that age. But it was, you learnt your crotchets, you learnt your rests, you learnt your eighth notes. Here's your rudiments, here's your paradiddles, this is your wrist movements and all this kind of stuff. But interestingly enough, he taught me to play traditional grit, which is again something not very standardised in drum teaching for young ones now. It's certainly something I wouldn't consider doing, because the difference between the right and the left hand is such. You've got to understand your muscle groups and you've got to understand your hand positionings to be able to play it, use it effectively. So yeah, so that was how I got started. Then from there, I had lessons, private lessons with a guy called Jeff Otter, and sadly Jeff Otter is no longer with us now. But he was a local drummer who played in the Salvation Army, but he was an incredible big band drummer. And I went to lessons with him on recommendation from Les, and I studied with him till I was about 12 or 13. And then, from there, I stopped drum lessons and I joined the local drum corps. Now, when I'm talking about drum corps, I'm not talking about sort of military-style drumming. I'm talking about American-style drum corps. We had one of those in my location in Bournemouth. In fact, we had 3. And I joined the local one, and that was the moment that my rudimental playing and my technique completely shifted at the age of 13. And I was playing, we were playing, to give you some exercise, we were kind of doing, at the age of 13, 14, I was doing paradiddles at 120, 130, 140, 150 BPM. In a snare drum line with 6 other guys who were doing it, and we had to be so accurate. Our stick heights had to be exactly the same, because you were judged on that. The way in which you held your sticks had to be completely identical. Your snare drum had to be the same height. So I was the shortest, so my snare drum was up here, and one of the guys down the other end of the line, he was almost 6 foot tall, so his snare drum was way down here. But everything had to be identical. And that's kind of really where I got my start. And I suppose I was in the drum corps right up until I was 24. But during that period of time, I also I studied with a local drum teacher. Some of you may have heard of him, a guy called Paul Brodie. And Paul Brodie was at the time BBC Radio big band drummer. But he was also, his most notable other student is Gavin Harrison. Oh, okay. So Gavin Harrison's father was a trumpet player in the BBC Radio big band, and Gavin studied with Paul as well. So Paul retired and came to Bournemouth, so I had lessons with Paul. And then round about kind of 18, 19, I went to Drum Tech. So every other Saturday I'd get on the train in Bournemouth and travel to Acton and study with Francis Serio, and I did that for about a year. And then I suppose after that I did that for about a year, and then kind of work life took off, because when I left school, my dad was very, very clever in one sense, and he said, because I said to him, I kind of at the age of 13, 14, maybe, I said, look, I think this is kind of what I want to do somewhere along the line. I want to do this for the rest of my life. And he said, okay, that's fine, but you need to get an apprenticeship of some description. He said, I don't care what it is, but you need to have something to fall back on. And he said, I'm a sportsman, and that's not always stable. So, he was fortunate because of being boxer. He was security guard and all this kind of stuff as well. So I actually studied, and I'm a qualified locksmith as well, which actually in lockdown has been really good, because I kind of put the word out thinking that I was going to have absolutely no work at all, and one of my friends who owns a company gave me about 2 weeks of lock fitting work at the beginning of lockdown, going down and doing some contracts in some new builds. So that was a really good thing that my father did, and one thing that I'm certainly trying to do with my son is give him some. He's got some passions. He loves playing the drums, but he loves gaming, and he really loves science, and so I'm trying to make sure that he's got lots of things covered, and so he's got lots of options and doesn't cut himself off. So that's really where I kind of, that's how I started, and that's my playing. And so then I suppose about 2021 I made the decision to turn pro as a drummer. and I handed in my notice with my firm, and I started a residency straight away in a holiday park in Christchurch, which is actually where I live. And the holiday park is no longer there anymore, but it was in Pontins, and I was doing 5 nights a week playing in the band for the residencies there, and it was brilliant. I mean, back then, 5 nights I was getting 120 quid a night, and we were doing 7 nights a week. And so I carried on doing that, and then I decided that I wanted to do some teaching, so I had some to get some private students and look for some schools, because I sort of always had this mentality about having things to fall back on and having a bit of a plan, realising that, you know, the industry isn't as secure as other areas of working life. So yeah, that kind of brings me up to around about 1999, 1998, and I just met Colin Warway then, and got to know him and learned about the Drum Sense teaching project, which I still use today as my beginner's teaching syllabus, because I just can't find anything that works better and gets children and students playing. And Colin suggested that I write a book, so I wrote what was called Essential Snare Drum Techniques, and this year the book actually is, as we speak, in fact I was working on it last night, it's going in its 20th year, and it's going for a re-edit. Now there were originally 4 volumes, so no one buys 4 volumes of anything unless you're J.K. Rowling, you know, and it's just not going to happen. So the 4 volumes have gone into one, and it's produced quite a nice book, a manual that takes you from actually having no snare drum technique to hopefully being able to play some nice intricate patterns, and to be able to do some stick tricks and have some facility on the snare drum that can be applied around the kit. So that's kind of where we're at the moment.
Cool.
Nice.
Lovely. I'm looking a bit to questions. A few more questions.
I think
Okay.
the video frozen on your screen because it's frozen.
Yeah, it's frozen.
Okay.
Yeah, Simon is
Oh no,
frozen.
you're back. There we are. Look
Yeah.
There we go. I'll do the occasional movement. There you go.
at-
I'm positioned. I'm in my house, and I position myself in the best place for the internet.
Okay.
okay.
Okay, so hopefully it'll work.
I had a question, but he already answered. I'll have to think of another one. So you go.
Okay.
So I have a question. I suppose I'm going to kind of springboard off of what you just said. So if you had to lay out what you considered the essential snare drum techniques, what would they be?
That's a really good question. The first thing, it's interesting. The first thing that I think is important for snare drum technique is stick grip. Okay, and this actually comes from having students come to me from that have been learning at other places and really struggle with facilitating things that they see and hear. Okay, so my take on snare drum technique is and I got this actually when I did about 6-7 hours of study with Jim Chapin, and what it comes from is basically my idea is that you bend your arm into a right angle and you let your hand fall naturally, and then you place your stick in, and all I'm doing at that point is using literally 2 movements. So I've bent my arm into a right angle, and all I've done is grab the stick naturally. Now if you look, what you'll see is that the last 3 fingers are cradling the stick, and the thumb comes just below the first finger. And I'm quite keen to get people to make sure they do that, because the thumb is actually attached to your carpal bridge, the muscle. Yeah. So if you position your thumb up above there, your carpal bridge starts to become tight, really tight. Okay, and as you know, and as we've all experienced, and we all know drummers who suffer from carpal tunnel syndrome. Now, I can't guarantee this is going to stop anyone from getting it, but in my theory is that the more you can do to relieve the pressure on the carpal bridge, the better it's going to be for you. So this is kind of a grip, and Steve Smith uses this. He's got 4 different ways. Steve Smith, notable drummer. Steve Smith. Vinny's very much like this. Vinny Colaiuta. Pete Riley uses this, and this is something that Bob showed me as well and got me into. So and what that does, it just allows you to the stick to be really free in its movement and up and down the hand. And all I'm doing there is just doing wrist turns. So that'd be the first thing that I would consider to be important in terms of snare drum technique. Using that method, it's very, very easy then to replicate that with your left hand, because you can literally do a mirror image, and you can say, okay, my right and my left hand are doing identically the same thing. And so straight away, from the outset, if the right and the left hand are doing the same thing, even with your left hand being weaker, the idea then is that it's that the facility is the same from your right to your left hand. So if this is weaker, it's a psychological thing to bring it in line with your right, because it's technically doing the same thing. Now, I play a lot of traditional grip. So if I have a student who is inquiring about traditional grip, the way I do this is I hand out as if I'm shaking the hand, and I put the stick in, and it rests at a 45-degree angle. And then quite simply, it's 2 fingers over and 2 fingers under. And then my thumb, the first joint of my thumb, rests on top of the first joint of my first finger, and my stick rests on the first joint of my third finger. And Dave Hassel's very good, another amazing drum teacher and drum kit facilitator. Dave Hassel sometimes says you've got to imagine you're cradling a goldfish in your hand, and its tail is in there, and you don't want it to move. And so that's my traditional grip methodology. Keeping the wrist straight as well. So quite often putting the stick on your wrist to make sure that your arm is staying straight, and you're lifting the stick literally through a singular plane of motion, like that. Some people play down, but it's just all about making sure that when your left hand is working, it's just moving in that motion. But if you're playing match grip, that's the grip we're at. So that'd be the first thing, Mark, in terms of starting off someone who has no or doesn't know anything about snare drum technique. And I don't labour on that point either, because as I've experienced through teaching, one of the things that students get really kind of, their mind gets annihilated when they're doing the same thing over and over again. So it's one of those things which I kind of chip away at week after week after week, and spend just a little bit of time on, and then some time on some playing. So from there, if someone is talking about getting into snare drum technique, the first thing I do is I do one of my drum corps exercises, actually, and it was one that I started doing when I was about 11, and basically, and quite interestingly, if you've been watching some of the Tommy Igoe stuff that he's been doing, this kind of 80 days challenge and what he's doing virtually the same exercise, and what it is, you're playing 16 with your right hand, 16 with your left hand, 16 with your right hand, 16 with your left hand, then you do 4 bars of hand-to-hand 16s, then you do 8 down to 1. So we get this. I'll just play it one time through. So it's going to be something like this. So I'm keeping the wrist really rotating. So it's my wrist that are moving completely singular strokes, full strokes of like 5, 6, 7, 8. Then we go down to 7. 5. And then you're back to the beginning, and that's a really great exercise for just analysing that full stroke all the time, and actually you can really accept the rebound at that point as well, because there's your movement. Going back to one of the teachings from Jim Chapin, he was very keen to not do this. there's where your stick starts down and up, because that's 2 movements. 1, 2. He was very keen on 1. Okay, so one movement. So that's one of the first exercises that I would do. Starting someone off on the route of going down, enhancing their snare drum technique, as it were.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
Do you want me to expand? Sorry, did you want me to expand on that?
If you want, feel free.
If you want to,
expand.
Go on.
Okay, all right. Have you got a question, Kira? You seem like you want to.
I was enjoying the nerdiness of the grip thing. Because I'm really with you. Mark knows what I'm talking about here.
Gosh.
Okay.
You know what? I don't even know. Mark taught me back in the day, but then I've had, pictures and Bob and all the rest of it. And it's really interesting you saying about the thumb and the first finger, because I sometimes see a lot of students do that, like that. I just think it takes away so much control, that one movement.
Well, I can give you a little bit of history as to actually why it's been allowed to filter down through probably 70 years of people playing the drums and learning to play the drums, and actually where it comes from, it's an orchestral technique for playing the press roll, keeping the finger round. And the thing with it is that when you're playing, if you're playing in an orchestra, you've got no, there's very little resistance you've got to build up, because everything is often played at quite a low volume. You're not playing any massively long pieces of snare drum work. There's a few orchestral pieces out there that do require it, but generally it's kind of embellishments and drags and roughs and press rolls and so to keep the finger wrapped round is something that where that comes from, and teachers of all, because obviously what you had is, say the first drum teacher started in 1920. Let's just use that as a date. I don't know that that's true, but that he would have been an orchestral player, and then he would have taken his teaching, and someone would have gone, right, well, I'm now doing that, and I'm going to expand onto the drum kit, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so forth. And then suddenly you have the influences of Sanford Moeller and Jim Chapin and all that kind of stuff coming across to the UK, where we get the grip and some of the influences we have now. The idea behind keeping what you also find is that doing that as well, keeping the thumb up there, in terms of it's an easier grip to achieve. All right, because you haven't got to think about it feels, most people feel it's more natural to keep the finger wrapped round. All right, if you've got the finger, like I always liken it to a tear, and it's dripping off the stick, and that's not necessarily a natural thing, because I think it's natural because I pick up and I instantly do that. But a lot of people who will pick up and will bring the finger wrapped round, and they'll go to the front of the hand to play. I mean, if you're trying to get your students to do that, I kind of scare them a bit with the whole carpal tunnel syndrome, and I say, well, look, basically, if you carry on this way, you're going to have your wrist sliced open.
That's what I need to do.
Or you're going to have your wrist fused and you won't be able to move them, and actually get them to hold the stick round and tight, and get them to press the carpal bridge, and they'll find that it's really tight, and then you get them to take the finger off, and you can actually see in my own it's really loose, and get them to do that, and suddenly what they'll do is they go, oh, well, my muscles are more relaxed, everything's more relaxed, that's going to be better for me. And you can liken it to a bit like, when you warm up when you go for a run. Not that I ever go for a run, but when you go out and do any exercise, you kind of try, generally you try and warm up. And that's the idea behind it. You're not exercising and exerting any stress over that muscle. And I'm really a keen advocate of that, because obviously, I've been playing the drums now for, it's going to be 41 years in November, right? And so I want to carry on playing right through until I'm dead. And you look at like someone like Jim Chapin. I mean, he was, and I only mention him because he's a great advocate for, he's the obvious advocate of snare drum technique. But he was still giving lessons from his nursing home on snare drum technique, and he was playing faster and more accurate than he ever could have done. And he credited it to the way in which he held his sticks and relaxation and all that kind of thing.
I love that.
And also, and actually, when I'm sort of moving around the kit as well, when you've got a surface which has got quite a bit of resistance, such as a snare drum pad or a snare drum, the resistance you get from your toms are totally different. But because I've developed my grip in such a way, it doesn't matter whether I'm on my pad or whether I'm on my 18-inch floor tom, I can get the same level of articulation out, and that comes down to grip and finger control.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think I really enjoy that attention to detail. The older I've got, I think the more I'm paying attention to.
Well, the other thing, I have to say, on the one or two little things that the technique interactions we've had over Instagram, the one thing that I do notice about your playing is that your right and left hand do look very similar, very identical. And it's such a great thing to try and keep yourself in check with. And as much as anything else, if your right hand and your left hand are identical in their grip, ultimately, when your technique is to the point, you are going to create the same sound from your right and your left hand. And that has massive ramifications in terms of recording, in terms of sound production around the kit, in terms of being able to just articulate dynamics. You've got control over it if your starting point is identical. That's certainly my approach to it, and certainly when in some of the teaching I've done. And interestingly enough, one of my students is Derek, or has been Derek from Jamiroquai, and he came to me for this very, very reason, that he was getting really, really bad arm tension, and it was because he was literally holding his sticks like this. And did that for for the first 15 years of his Jamiroquai career. And if you look at the way he plays now, he's got kind of a bit of a hybrid between that and that. And the other thing that's really important in terms of having the fingers around the stick is I liken my hand to 100%. So 50, 20, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. I'm a drummer, not a mathematician. So that's 100%. So if I'm doing that, I've got 60% less control over the stick than I have if I'm doing that. And that's it's a key point. And it doesn't matter how old the student is, whether they're 6 or 60, they will understand that. The other thing with it is as well is that, in terms of little teaching anomalies, you can sort of liken the grip to holding the handlebars of a bike. You would never hold handlebars like that on a bike, because if you went over a divot or a rut, you'd fall off. You are out of control. So five digits on the stick is actually a really, really important part of snare drum technique, an important part of the things that I try and get my students to do. That said, I'm not going to do that all the time with a 10-year-old student who's come for his first drum lesson. They want to play some rock and do some stuff. But as time goes on, it's one of those things that you can really chip away on. Quite often I could say, hey, just check your grip out there. And they'll go, oh yeah, bring it back into check. And I say, right, have a look at that for next week. Give them a couple of exercises to work on with their hands. And over a period of time, they'll come back and their technique will start to work. The thing with grip is that if you aren't holding your sticks in a certain way, it will prevent you from doing certain things that you want to do, and it will prevent you doing certain things and having certain facilities, on the pad or the drum kit.
So, have you guys got any other questions? I'm just aware of the time.
It's okay. Just very quickly, on a slight aside, do you know Rob Hirons? Have you heard of him?
I haven't, no.
No, he came and did a clinic at Felipe's a while ago, and he talked. Do you remember this, Felipe? And he talked about the way he gets his students to get that grip.
Oh, I don't remember. Sorry.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
get him to flip it over, and you automatically catch it in that position. And it was just a
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
brilliant piece of advice.
That's a
I'd really struggled
yeah.
to get students to do it. And I saw
Okay.
Bob say that, and I've been doing it ever since. And it has two great advantages. First off, when they catch it, their hands in the right position. And secondly, you get hours of fun watching the ones that can't do it.
Excellent.
But
Oh, no, that's fantastic. Yeah.
Really nice.
That's a really. And it's nice little things like that, and all those sorts of little things are really good for to get students to do things that they would not necessarily feel very happy about doing or might find quite boring. That's a great point actually. I'm gonna use that. Thank you.
Take my 10%. Felipe.
That's all right.
I have a question more away from the nerdiness of being a drummer and more into the personal thing, which is, how long did you have lessons with Bob Armstrong, and what is it that he made, the difference he made, and all the drummers who had lessons with him over the years that made him such a sought after drum teacher?
Okay, so when I went to Bob, I went to Bob, and I was very, very honoured that he didn't want to touch my technique at all. But what he did do is he started to have a look at my my sound production, and my sound production, and the way I was hitting cymbals, and the way I was kind of attacking different parts of the drum kit. And I think what the great thing about Bob, and certainly what I got from lessons, I had lessons with Bob for about 18 months, maybe 2 years, and he never played the drums once. He never sat down and actually demonstrated everything to me. And I think what I got from that is that what a great teacher he was, because of the way in which he was capable of communicating the information that he knew was relevant to me. You know, I mean, when I went to Bob, I'd already been. I mean, I played. I'd done a little mini tour actually with a saxophone player called Derek Nash, who's the lead saxophone player with the Jules Holland Big Band. So I'd just done a little 5-day tour with him, and this was back in 2002, 2003, maybe 2004. And I thought, oh, right, wow, I'm kind of really, I'm this amazing jazz player, and my jazz technique is awesome, and I've got everything going on. And actually, I went there, and he did as he always did. He got the bass line out, the dum 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 ba dum dum dum, right, and I played along to that, and I was absolutely terrible. Terrible. I mean, I had no idea. It was really about. For me, what he saw in me is that my sound wasn't seated on the drum kit. It wasn't settled. It wasn't grounded in terms of where my flow was coming from. It wasn't grounded in terms of really where my stick placement was in relationship to everything else that was going on. And that's quite a deep concept. But I mean, bearing it this time, I've been 2000. I'd probably been a pro drummer coming up for 8 years at that point, maybe seven or 8 years. And so, I thought, oh, this is great. I'm doing all this, and I've done loads of TV work and some sessions and all this kind of thing. And what was really great about Bob is that he analysed my playing to the point where he broke it right down and totally changed my sound. And it was nothing to do with the way in which I held my sticks. It was nothing to do with the way in which what I could actually technically play. It was nothing to do with that. It was to do with actually aligning everything in a really musical way, which I'd never thought about doing before, or never really kind of looked at doing. And that was the great thing about Bob. And I think to sort of answer the one of the final part or a part of the question, what everyone saw in Bob was the fact that he had the ability to change people's playing according to who they were as a person and who they were as a drummer already. You know, he didn't try and say, right, you know, whatever Bob decided to do with you, or whatever Bob um, gave you, it was because it was right for your particular learning need at that time. And his bank of information was, it was just endless. You know, he had a solution for everything. I went to him one day and I said, look, I really want to learn some brushes. And he said, no, you can't learn brushes until you've done this particular thing. And I never got it until I'd been through this particular process for about 3 or 4 lessons. And actually, the idea was that I had to learn a certain feel and a certain thing before he would then bring the brushes in, because it directly related. And so that's for me what I got from Bob. And also, you know, he was like, he was such a sweetheart. I remember when my mother passed, he got on the phone to me and he sat with me. He probably had about a 45-minute conversation on the phone with me, just talking to me about how to understand the different areas of grief and the different types of grief that I was going through, and all that I was going to go through. So, you know, he was quite to everybody. He was a really special individual in that sense, and that came through in his teaching as well. You know, he was there for the student. And that's really, you know, for me, what I got from Bob, I think.
Cool.
You know.
So I think we're coming up
Any other...
for time, so we
coming up to the end of the meeting, are we?
We have a last question that we're going to ask you, and Kira's going to do it. Just to finish up.
Okay.
What do you feel is missing from drum education at the moment?
Wow, that's a really, really interesting question. What do I feel is missing? Well, the great thing is I mean, the lovely... I'll sort of circumnavigate that by telling you what I think is really good to begin with. We've got, all the drum teachers that I'm in contact with, and all the people I know who are actively trying to educate, all have really sincere intentions, all have really wonderful methodologies, and whoever studies, like with you guys, they're studying, everyone's going to get something. So there's a lot of great drum education already out there. I think if I was going to suggest one thing that would be that is missing is it would be really nice to have some sort of centralised and recognised qualification specifically for drum teachers. So I'm not talking about an ABRSM teaching diploma. I'm talking about actually being able to sit an exam to say you are qualified to teach the drums to this certain level. And I think that would be a really, really great thing. And a part of that comes because, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way to anyone who is trying to make a living or trying to get started, but I mean, I'm sure we've all seen there are so many pop-up drum teachers who teach drums because they don't gig, or because
especially
they can't
now
gig,
with lockdowns, popping.
Right, you know,
drum teachers are popping right, left, and center every day.
You know, and it's and I don't, and as I say, I don't mean this in a derogatory way, because I will support anyone who is, you know, on the journey to try and make a career. And I really do believe that there's enough of the pie for everybody. You know, I mean, I'm really lucky. I'm doing 35 online lessons a week, and I'm totally blessed with it. And I've got another drum teacher who works at my studio with me, and he's got about 25 lessons, and we operate from the same place, and they're completely different students. They're not, you know, he's got his own work, I've got my own work. So I think there's enough of the pie for everyone to have a really good share of it. It would just be really nice to be able to see a standardised qualification which would be nationally recognised, so that, you know, a bit like you know, the Corgi registered gas engineer kind of thing. That kind of thing for me would be a great thing to have, and you know, it would be not so much from a regulatory point of view, because I don't think that there should be a standard set of things that you teach necessarily, because all five of us will have different things and different ideas that will quite possibly lead to the same outcome. But I just think to have a really high-end qualification specifically for drum teachers in terms of education would be a really good thing.
Brilliant.
Great idea.
Okay.
Cool.
Wonderful.
That's a great thing to end on. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honour and a privilege, and lovely to meet you, Philippe. I've never met you before. So
Yeah,
it's
we
really
never met
lovely
before. Nice to meet you.
No, yeah, and you, and lovely to see you, Kira, and you, Mark. It's wonderful to see you again. Keep up with those drags and those flams, Kira.
Thank you.
Thanks, Simon.
Okay, take care, guys.
Take care.
Okay, we'll see you.